Okay, let's just jump right into this explainer and talk about how the everyday food on a soldier's plate absolutely shaped history, morale, and military success. You know, we usually think of military history as this grand chess game of tactics, cutting-edge weapons, and famous generals. But today, we're zooming in on something way more basic. Something that literally fueled every major campaign in human history.
An army marches on its stomach. This proverb honestly hits the nail on the head. It sets the absolute highest stakes for any military force. Think about it. To be effective, an army heavily relies on having enough good food, especially when they're out on a long campaign. If you can't meet that basic, foundational need to just keep people fed, the whole operation is compromised. Even the greatest, most well-equipped army in the world will just collapse.
So that brings us to the million-dollar question. What exactly is in that stomach? We're going to dive into the fascinating culinary evolution of the British Army, just to see what literally fueled soldiers from the late 18th century all the way up to the modern era. We'll track how their diets morphed from rock-hard salted meats to these incredibly complex, multicultural modern menus, and look at how the sheer logistics of feeding thousands of people while under fire totally changed the world.
Here is the roadmap for our chronological journey today. We'll track the evolution starting with early menus and Crimean disasters, moving into hardtack and trench stew, checking out the WW2 compo ration, then modernizing the military menu, and finally catering to diverse faiths.
Section 1. Early Menus and Crimean Disasters, the Dark Ages of Rations.
Back in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the standard diet for a British soldier was, well, incredibly simple. They got 2 meals a day, mainly consisting of slow-perishing stuff like salted pork or boiled beef, along with a chunk of bread. They were also issued a daily morale booster, which was a pint of wine or a third of a pint of rum or gin. But here is the wild part. When they were hanging around camp, soldiers drank up to 8 pints of a weak ale called small beer every single day. And no, it wasn't a constant party. They literally had to drink it as a substitute for clean water just to stay hydrated without catching something awful from contaminated sources.
Then the year 1811 rolls around, and it is a massive game changer. This pioneering company, Duncan, Hall, and Gamble, developed the vacuum tin can and actually built the world's first factory dedicated solely to canning food. Starting with the Napoleonic Wars, this invention completely revolutionized how supplies reached the troops. For the very first time, meat and other perishables could be preserved and safely transported without getting ruined. But even with that massive technological leap, things could still go horribly wrong. Case in point, the Crimean War in the 1850s, where logistics completely collapsed into a total national scandal. Troops were regularly surviving on just half rations of rock-hard biscuits and salt meat, maybe getting 2 potatoes and an onion for the entire month. Naturally, scurvy broke out. It got so bad that soldiers' gums were too inflamed to even chew their biscuits. So to combat this, the army shipped out nearly 20,000 pounds, that's 9 tons, of scurvy-preventing lime juice to the starving troops.
But get this, all 278 cases of that life-saving lime juice sat completely untouched for 2 whole months. Why? Because the guy in charge of supplies, Commissary General William Filder, just didn't feel it was his job to tell the troops the juice had arrived. Seriously! Because of that mind-boggling administrative negligence, more soldiers actually ended up in the Scutari Hospital for scurvy than for actual battle wounds.
Moving on to Section 2, Hardtack and Trench Stew. Industrialization meets nutrition. So, after that total disaster in Crimea, the army tried to reform the diet to include higher energy foods, but honestly, it severely lacked variety and was sometimes completely indigestible. Take the Boer War, for example. Soldiers were issued these notoriously dense biscuits called hardtack. They were absolutely loathed, mostly because they could literally crack a soldier's teeth unless they were soaked in tea or water first. Tin goods were also used as emergency rations in a field kit. One famous tin had a meat dinner packed in one end and cocoa in the other, which was designed to keep a soldier going for 36 hours of active service.
Fast forward to the First World War, and an individual soldier's daily intake completely exploded to a massive 4,000 calories. Because the war was largely static and locked in trenches, food supplies were actually pretty reliable. They were wolfing down bread, jam, boiled plum puddings, and just copious, endless amounts of tea. Plus, soldiers supplemented this huge calorie intake with food parcels sent from home and hot meals that were cooked up behind the lines.
But dining in the trenches was a daily misery.
And it really came down to a little thing called the Tommy cooker. While hot food did exist behind the lines, frontline soldiers used these small, solid fuel folding stoves to heat up their tinned food right in the trenches. One of the most infamous items was mac and cheese stew. It was basically a mix of sliced turnips, carrots, and beef, or, let's be real, mostly gristle. If you could warm it up on your Tommy cooker, it was deemed edible. But served cold, the men who had to choke it down considered it absolutely revolting.
Section 3. The WWI Compo Ration. Unboxing the 14-man crate.
During the Second World War, frontline troops who were waiting for field kitchens to get set up relied heavily on composite or compo rations. If you were to unbox one of these 14-man wooden crates, you'd find a surprisingly varied, heavy-calorie lifeline. It was absolutely stuffed with tins of bully beef, Spam, steak and kidney pudding, beans, cheese, jam, biscuits, soup, sausages, and margarine. Soldiers would cook these items up on a variety of portable stoves. They also got these little morale-boosting emergency iron rations, which were usually high-energy treats like chocolate and sweets.
Section 4. Modernizing the military menu, from tins to pouches.
Entering the post-war era, those heavy, clunky tins from the World Wars were eventually phased out. By the mid-1990s, they were replaced by foil-packed, boil-in-the-bag meals. But there was a really surprising and honestly highly controversial modern adjustment made during deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. For decades, the standard 24-hour ration pack included beloved chocolate bars, but the military had to pull them because they frequently melted in the intense desert heat. Their replacement? Sachets of peanut butter. Sure, it's a nutritional equivalent, but let me tell you, it was a significantly less popular choice among the troops.
And finally, Section 5. Catering to diverse faiths, food as identity and morale.
Here's an absolutely crucial point we have to address. Food isn't just fuel to keep the body moving. It is deeply tied to a person's cultural identity and religious practice. The British Indian Army absolutely recognized this and maintained incredibly strict dietary guidelines to honor its soldiers. They assigned specific cooks, known as langaris, based on whether a company was Muslim, Sikh, or Hindu, and even considered specific castes. It gets even more detailed. During World War I, the Indian Hospital in Brighton actually set up completely separate water supplies in 9 different kitchens. They even issued stackable cooking pots for high-caste Hindu Brahmins, so they could prepare their own food on campaign and preserve their caste.
And that historic tradition of dietary inclusion and deep respect is still very much alive in the modern military today. Because the British Army has long employed overseas recruits and soldiers of every faith, today's ration packs come with a really wide range of menus. That includes specific halal and kosher options, making sure that every single soldier's nutritional and spiritual needs are fully supported out in the field.
Looking back over this whole timeline, it is just incredible to see how military care has evolved. I mean, we started with the revolutionary vacuum tin cans in 1811, suffered through the tragic logistical scurvy scandals of the 1850s, ballooned up to 4,000-calorie trench diets in the First World War, unboxed the varied compo rations of World War II, and finally arrived at the scientifically crafted boil-in-the-bag meals of the 1990s.
It really puts our everyday comforts into perspective, doesn't it? The next time you sit down for a nice hot meal tonight, ask yourself a question. Could your morale survive on tooth-breaking hardtack biscuits and a cold tin of gristly trench stew? It leaves you wondering just how much the endurance, bravery, and absolute resilience of history's soldiers relied entirely on what they unpacked from a little tin. Keep that in mind, and seriously, never underestimate the power of a good meal.